The Wrong Address, Scene 1. The office was nearly silent, except for the soft hum of a desk lamp and the rustling of papers. Chloe Miller let out a long sigh, rubbing her temples as she glanced at the time. 11:57 p.m. Another late night, another battle with exhaustion. She packed up her things, throwing her coat over one arm and clutching her nearly dead phone in the other. Outside, the city streets were quieter than usual. The occasional honk echoed in the distance, but the sidewalks were mostly empty. Chloe tapped her screen, calling for a cab. 2% battery, great. A car pulled up to the curb, and she barely glanced at the driver as she slid into the back seat. He wasn't her usual guy, but she was too tired to care. "Where to?" he asked, his voice even and unreadable. She mumbled her address, leaning back against the seat with, "Here we are," the driver said flatly, pulling to a stop. Chloe blinked, still groggy. She stepped out into the crisp night air, pulling her coat tighter around herself. The moment her feet hit the pavement, the cab sped off, disappearing into the distance. Something was wrong. She looked around in confusion, her stomach twisting. The street wasn't familiar. The house in front of her? Definitely not hers. Her heart pounded as she spun in slow circles, trying to piece it together. This couldn't be right. Where am I? The light from a dim porch illuminated the house, casting long shadows over the dark street. Chloe's phone was dead. She had no idea where she was. Chloe's heart pounded as she stood in front of the unfamiliar house. The street was eerily quiet, the only light spilling from the dim porch light above the door. She glanced down at her dead phone, frustration creeping in. Her mind raced with options. None of them good. She hesitated for a moment before summoning what little courage she had left. With a shaky breath, she raised her hand and knocked. The silence that followed was almost unbearable. Seconds later, the door creaked open, revealing a man standing in the doorway. He was shirtless, his chest broad and muscled, still glistening slightly with the remnants of sleep. His dark hair was a little messy, and his eyes were heavy, barely open. He looked like he had just been yanked from a deep sleep. Chloe's breath caught in her throat as her eyes quickly swept over him. His presence was powerful, but his groggy, almost confused demeanor caught her off guard. His voice was rough, sleep-laden, and not at all the tone she expected. "What time is it?" He squinted at her, clearly trying to make sense of the situation, his gaze flicking between her and the street. "Who are you?" She froze for a second, her throat tightening. The words she needed to say wouldn't come. Can I help you?" His tone was slower, still disoriented. He crossed his arms over his chest, a slight frown forming as he tried to shake off the sleep. Chloe couldn't find the words at first. She swallowed, looking around nervously. I got into the wrong cab. My phone died. I'm not sure where I am. I thought this was my place, but it's not." She bit her lip, glancing at the ground. "I'm sorry to wake you." The man sighed, rubbing his eyes as if trying to clear the sleep. "It's late," he muttered under his breath. "Why didn't you just call someone?" "I can't. My phone's dead. I don't know who to call." Her voice was quiet, frustrated. He blinked a couple of times, clearly processing the situation, then stepped aside, his body filling the doorway, still shirtless and barely awake. "You're lucky I'm a nice guy," he grumbled, though there was a trace of amusement in his tone. "Come inside. You can figure this out. It's too late to be out here alone." Chloe hesitated, unsure of what to do. His casualness made her wary, but there was something about him, something almost reassuring in his sleepy demeanor. She stepped over the threshold, her mind racing with questions. The door clicked shut behind her, and she immediately felt the weight of being in a stranger's house. Alone. And she couldn't help but notice how his eyes lingered on her. even as he rubbed his face, trying to fully wake up. The house felt too quiet, too still. Chloe stood awkwardly in the entryway, her eyes flicking to the bare walls and the sparse, almost clinical decor. She could hear Dylan moving around behind her, the sound of him rubbing his eyes as he yawned. So, what's the deal? You just wander into people's houses at night? Dylan's voice was still rough from sleep, but his tone was more awake now, a little teasing, almost daring. Chloe shifted her weight uncomfortably. No, of course not. She looked toward the door, then back at him. It's just, I didn't know where else to go. I didn't mean to bother you. Dylan gave her a half smirk, leaning casually against the wall as he crossed his arms. Well, you sure picked a weird night to be lost. It's late. His eyes studied her, scanning her as if he was trying to decide what kind of person she was. Chloe shifted again, feeling the weight of his gaze. Yeah, I know. I just didn't expect this. Her voice was barely above a whisper. Expect what? Dylan asked, taking a step closer, his gaze never leaving her. A guy in his boxers to open the door? Chloe's cheeks flushed. She didn't know if she was more embarrassed by her situation or by his unfiltered stare. Dylan chuckled, noticing her discomfort. Relax, I'm not gonna bite. You're safe here for now. But, you sure you want to hang around? It's gonna be a long night. I just need my phone charged. Chloe tried to sound calm, but there was an edge to her voice. Then I'll go. He raised an eyebrow, his lips curling into that playful smirk again. Sure you don't want to stay for a drink? I can't promise it'll be the best company, but it's something. I think I'd rather stick to the charging. Chloe was quick to answer, though the offer lingered in her mind. It felt weird. Too weird. But Dylan's voice had a warmth to it now that made her second-guess herself. Without another word, Dylan led her toward the living room, moving with a confident stride. Chloe followed hesitantly, looking around the room. It wasn't anything spectacular. Clean, neat, but impersonal, as if he didn't care to make it feel like home. So, what do you do? Chloe asked, trying to steer the conversation away from the awkwardness. Dylan flopped onto the couch, leaning back with his hands behind his head. Me? I'm a night owl. Not much to tell. I do a little work here and there. Right, what kind of work? He grinned, a hint of mystery behind his eyes. Does it matter? You're not here for the job interview. Chloe felt a surge of frustration but pushed it down. Look, I'm just trying to figure this out. This isn't normal, you know. Normal? Dylan raised an eyebrow. I'm not sure I remember what that is. He leaned in slightly, his eyes narrowing playfully. But hey, you're here now. Might as well make the best of it. Her stomach twisted again. This was getting weirder by the second, but somehow the attraction she felt toward him, despite everything, seemed to be growing. Dylan stretched, still barely awake, rubbing his eyes as he glanced at Chloe. All right, I'll go look for a charger, but don't get your hopes up. I don't exactly keep a stash of phone chargers lying around for random strangers. Chloe nodded, forcing a small smile, though she still felt out of place. Dylan turned and made his way up the stairs, his footsteps slow but deliberate. Chloe stood frozen for a moment, glancing around the living room again, trying to get her bearings. She felt the weight of the situation, being in a stranger's house, late at night, with no way to leave. When Dylan came back down, he had a pair of shorts on but was still shirtless. Chloe couldn't help but notice how his muscular build caught the light as he moved. He leaned against the railing, watching her closely, a smirk tugging at the corner of his lips. No charger for your fancy phone, he said, his voice playful but with a hint of mockery. But I do have this. He held up his cell phone. Want to make a call? Maybe call a friend to come get you? Chloe hesitated. She didn't know anyone's number by heart. She had always relied on her phone to keep track of everything. A sinking feeling started to gnaw at her stomach. No, she mumbled. I don't think I know anyone's number off the top of my head. Dylan raised an eyebrow, clearly amused. Really? I thought people still remembered a number or two. Guess not. But hey, you can use the house phone if you need it. He pointed to the phone on the table nearby. If you're brave enough to try it. Just as she was about to reply, the sound of raindrops started to pound against the window. It began as a soft patter, but quickly intensified into a heavy downpour. The wind howled outside, making the house feel colder than it already was. Chloe glanced at the door, but there was no way she was walking out into that storm. Her stomach tightened. I don't think I'll be going anywhere tonight. Dylan, sensing her discomfort, leaned against the back of the couch, arms crossed. Nope, not with that rain. Guess you're stuck here. Stuck, Chloe repeated a little too defensively. Relax, Dylan said with a chuckle. I'm not going to make you sleep on the floor. There's a couch. The bed's mine, but I'm not about to offer that up to some random person in the middle of the night. Chloe felt a flush of heat rise to her cheeks. Right, she muttered, trying to hide her unease. A couch sounds fine. Dylan grinned, clearly amused by her discomfort. Glad you think so. Make yourself at home. I'll figure out something in the morning. But tonight? Well, you're my guest. Try not to make it awkward, all right? Chloe swallowed, not quite sure what to say. The atmosphere had shifted and her mind was racing, trying to process the situation. She was stuck with this guy for the night, and there was no telling what would happen next. Dylan, clearly enjoying her unease, shrugged. Well, since you're not going anywhere and I'm not letting you just sit there all night, let me know if you need anything. I'm going upstairs to crash again, and don't even think about sneaking into my room. He flashed her a mischievous grin before heading back up the stairs. Chloe stood there, her thoughts swirling. She had no idea what was going to happen next, but she had no choice but to wait until morning. The rain continued to pour outside as she sat down on the couch, feeling the tension grow between them. To be continued.